Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn. And today's episode, we're talking about the 2024 NFL Draft Class of the New York Jets based on production, athleticism, and other statistical factors. So stay tuned into the end of the video where I reveal who the best players were that the Jets drafted, but also how I would grade their overall draft class. And the way that I grade draft classes is a lot different than everybody else. Is I grade them based on statistics, based on production, athleticism, and other sort of athleticism traits. So one aspect that I grade draft classes on is draft approximate value. So every selection that a team has a certain value to it. And you typically are expected to get a certain type of player in different places that you take them in the draft. This is an example of that. So these are all the average AVs for the range of picks between picks 1 through 5 down to picks 6 through 10 and then so on and so forth. So essentially, when you draft prospects at the top of the draft, you're more likely going to get a very good prospect versus at the lower end of the draft. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but this is what's expected when you draft a player in the 4th round. They're not expected to be a starter. They're not expected to be a backup. But what if they did become a backup starter, I should say? What if they did become a backup? Though this is where data grades come in because data grades, based on the work that I've done, and you can check out my top 50 prospect video to kind of look at all the correlations with it. But for the most part, about 86 to 90% of NFL starters typically have 70 percentile or better data grades at the NFL level. So if a prospect falls below that standard, they should be considered a risky selection for that. So, but overall, that is kind of how I do my draft grades in terms of that. Now, in terms of data grades, this is another aspect which is also known as a ceiling grade. So it takes a look at athleticism, production, statistical factors such as strength of schedule, strength of team. All of these things make the data grade, the value grade, the ceiling grade, whatever you want to call it. This is their upside. So if a prospect runs like a really high 40-yard dash, this would raise their EAV score. Now, are there other things that matter? Absolutely, which is why you add in those other layers of data to that particular score. But that is what the ceiling grade is. And this is how I grade prospects. I look at what the average AV is for where they're selected, and then I look at what their data grade was, and then I see if their data grade is able to outperform where they were at. Now, there are some limiting factors to my grading system. These are all those limiting factors. So, coaching of a team can affect outcomes at the NFL level. Everybody knows this. If you have bad coaching, you're going to be better than if you have good coaching. The publicity of a media market can also influence the perception of a prospect, leading to inflated grades. Unforeseen injuries can also lead to inconsistent outcomes. Psychological and mental makeup can affect NFL outcomes. And then substitution bias, which allows for the possibility that coaches go from a higher costing prospect to a lower costing but lower quality prospect, is something that happens all the time in the NFL. You'll have teams that draft a prospect to replace a prospect because they didn't want to pay that prospect, and they're not always the same in terms of their value. So I don't think anybody could disagree that getting rid of Tyreek Hill on the Kansas City Chiefs was necessarily a win for the other wide receivers on that team or for the Kansas City Chiefs in general. They kind of cobbled together other wide receivers to take his place, but they're not really as good as Tyreek Hill as the real thing. They're never going to be as good as Tyreek Hill. So that's kind of what the substitution bias is kind of explaining there, is that phenomenon there. Now, in terms of the Jets' needs, these are all the needs that I've identified on the Jets from a needs perspective. So NFL positional or AV is basically how they've actually performed in their career per year basis. The data grade is how they tested from a data perspective, and then age is kind of where they're at. Typically, prospects that are a lot older are going to be prospects that you're going to want to replace at some point. So I think everybody would not disagree that even though Aaron Rodgers is good, he's a good player, he eventually will not be able to play football anymore. And because of that, you should be looking for a replacement for him. At least maybe not be open about it, be definitely all in on Aaron Rodgers, but do understand that a replacement does need to come for him at some point in the future. Then, of course, you have the needs assessment. So, based on that, these are all the needs that I identified for the New York Jets. They need tight ends, they need offensive line, and they need quarterbacks. So those are the big needs that they need to address based on their overall data of their starting players. Then, of course, when you go to the defensive side of the football, they do need edge rushers and linebackers, but they already do have a pretty good defense. So, based on my data, the Jets had the best defense in the NFL. So, they didn't have a lot of major needs on defense, but there definitely are some areas that they could improve upon, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Overall, the biggest factors in terms of my final grade, so before I actually get into the picks, is these are the things that I grade these picks on. Did they meet their roster needs? That's a big thing. You know, the needs that I have found in the assessment is quarterback, tight end, offensive line, edge, and linebacker. Did they draft good prospects? Because even if you need a quarterback and you draft a quarterback, are they actually a good prospect? Are they a prospect that's actually going to make it the next level? Which is what my data grades kind of show you is if they're a 70 or higher prospect, there's a higher likelihood of them becoming a starter versus anything lower than a 70 is usually a very risky prospect that may not make it at the next level. So that's definitely something to look at. And then, of course, you have did they draft prospects that had the data potential to outperform their draft status? So these are questions that when I grade the day three area of the draft, I'm looking for that. I'm looking to see, okay, you took a player in a round where they're probably not going to make it, but the players who typically do make it have better data grades. So if you drafted a player with a good data grade in the later rounds, I'm going to give you some extra points for that, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. But these are all the questions that data can give some answers to, and we'll start to answer those questions now, starting with pick 11, Fashanu, offensive tackle out of Penn State. His data grade was 97.31 out of 100. His projected floor grade was 89.80 with a balanced grade of 93.56 out of 100. His average AV for where he was selected was 95.75 with an overall pick grade of an A. So he was a very good prospect for them in terms of pick 11. They did have offensive line help. They needed that help. They really did. They really need a lot of offensive line help. So I do like this pick for that. Based on his athleticism testing, he had an 87 percentile explosion score with a 78 percentile speed score, and pretty much hits all the areas that you're looking for at the position in terms of that. Also, when you get to pick 65, which is a really good selection for them, also in Malachi Corley, wide receiver out of Western Kentucky, his data grade was 78.15 out of 100. His floor is 60.80, and his balance grade is 69.47 out of 100, with an AV pick of about 75.29 out of 100. The overall pick grade I would give for this is a C, a high C, but definitely a C because, again, his data grade is only 78.15. And why? Well, let's get to it. So one of the big reasons was because of his market share data. He had a 63 percentile total, I would say, receiving market share score. Total offensive market share was 79 percentile, and touchdown market share was 86.29 out of 100. So he was very much a very good touchdown guy, but his receiving market share wasn't as high as you would like it to be. Also, in terms of efficiency scores, he was very good in terms of TD percentage, yards per touchdowns per touch, but wasn't so great in terms of yards per reception. So he's somebody who his efficiency scores were a little inconsistent in terms of his data. Athleticism wise, he was fantastic, near elite explosiveness, 89 percentile, and near elite flexibility for his size with an 83 percentile score in that area. And these are areas that you really want to see out of sort of a yak wide receiver, which I think is what he's really going to be on the Jets. But I really like his overall athleticism traits, and that's why he scored so highly based on his data grade. And then, of course, we get to adjusted production traits. Takes a look at strength of schedule, strength of team, his age as a prospect, and all of these areas pretty much put him near the starter averages. It puts him above the starter averages, actually. And I think he has a very good shot of becoming a long-term starter for the Jets. Now, is there some risk to him? Absolutely. Because he played at Western Kentucky, because he didn't have elite production and played at Western Kentucky, there's going to be some concerns there with him because of that. Because a lot of times prospects that come from lesser competition don't always translate at the same rate as players who come from more higher end schools. And that's just statistics. I'm not trying to be biased towards any of these players, although teams might be biased a little bit where they, don't really target the players at the lower level competition. But this is just something that I've noticed in the data that is of note about Malachi Corley. Then we get to pick 134 and Braylon Allen, running back out of Wisconsin. His data grade is 85.86 out of 100 with a projected floor grade of 58.58 out of 100. His pick AV is 49.81 out of 100. With an overall pick grade, I would give them a B. Based on his production traits, he did really well in terms of his. He was 80 percentile in terms of his total offensive market share, at 89 percentile in terms of touchdown market share, with average receiving market share. So he wasn't the best receiver, but he was pretty good in terms of getting in the end zone as a running back. When you look at his efficiency scores, he did really well in this area as well in terms of yards per touch, receptions or yards per reception, and also decent in terms of TD percentage. So all those areas are pretty much within the starter averages at the position. And when you look at his athleticism traits, he had an 86 percentile speed score, which is based on his estimated speed score. So we didn't get a 40-yard dash during the season, but we did get an estimated speed score from NFLDraftScout.com. And based on his size, he would have projected an 86 percentile speed score with a 68 percentile explosion score. A lot of people had him as potentially a 4.5, 4.6 speed player. If that's the case, it probably would have put him in sort of the 40 to 50 percentile, but even with that, it's still decent athleticism traits because of his explosion testing. And then, of course, the most important thing out of everything is the adjusted production score. And based on Allen's adjusted production score, he tested really well in terms of his age, his MSA rating, and his pass rating. All those areas are above what is expected for a prospect like him, and I'm excited to see what happens with him, definitely, with this data. Then, of course, we get to pick 171 and Jordan Travis, quarterback out of Florida State. His data grade or ceiling is 58.73 out of 100. His projected floor is 29.67 out of 100 with a balanced grade of 44.20. And his AV, his pick AV is 48.65 out of 100. Overall pick grade for him would be a F because of his data grade. 58.73 is not a D, people. It's a F. And he does have some good data, though. I mean, his mobile quarterback score was fantastic. He had a 90 plus percentile mobile quarterback score, which basically looks at his ability to rush as a quarterback ball carrier. And when you look at his efficiency scores weren't that bad. But the biggest thing that really holds him back is his age. He's 24 years old already. And again, I understand people are tired about hearing about age over and over and over again every single draft season. I don't care about age. I don't care about age. But the statistics are what they are. Typically, quarterbacks that are older have a much higher bust rate compared to quarterbacks that are younger. So I do think there are some things with Jordan Travis that are decent, but I think there is a bit of a bust rate, especially for where he was selected. He wasn't taken in the first round, he wasn't taken in the second round. So he is a little bit of a riskier prospect long term where he may not make it. But he could potentially, but he may not as well. Then, of course, we get to pick 173 and Isaiah Davis, running back out of South Dakota State. Based on his data grade, he had a 70.95 out of 100 score, 41.75 in terms of his floor grade, 56.35 in terms of his balanced grade, and then his AV is 39.78 out of 100. I would give this overall pick a grade of a C based on his data potential. Based on his production, he was above average in every single metric, but he wasn't quite near the starter averages at the position. And when you look at his efficiency scores, his efficiency was decent. His yards per touch, TD percentage was good, but his yards per reception wasn't exactly where you want it to be. And then athleticism-wise, he had above average athleticism across the board, but didn't have elite level athleticism. Didn't have athleticism indicative of the starter averages at the position. So he's kind of a fringe backup rotational type running back. And then the worst part about it is his adjusted production score puts them below the starter averages and the Pro Bowl averages and the All Pro averages. Again, his production, his athleticism traits are okay, but he's kind of like Will Shipley, but he didn't play at Clemson. He played at South Dakota State. So a lot of his data is going to be kind of pushed down because of that strength of schedule and that strength of team aspect to him. So again, I think the better running back taken was Braylon Allen, and then they followed up by taking another running back, which I think is a little bit redundant. They probably could have went at other positions that are actually are bigger needs. But who knows? Maybe the player that they wanted was drafted before them. You never know. But I just don't like the pick for that aspect. I think both Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis are okay running back prospects, but the Jets had other needs. Unless there's something I don't know. Unless there's something with the Jets backfield that I don't know. This is not the best selection ever that I would have made for the Jets. Then, of course, you get to pick 176 and Quantez Stiggers, cornerback out of Toronto, out of the Toronto Argonauts. Now, again, he didn't go to college at the Toronto Argonauts, but he played for the Toronto Argonauts. And his data grade is 73.21 out of 100. His floor is 41.79. Balance grade is 57.50. And his pick AV is 39.3 out of 100, with the overall pick grade being a C. Taking a look at his market share production scores, and this was based on Toronto. So I took his data from the CFL. I treated him kind of like a small school prospect. So I didn't really give him any points in terms of strength of schedule, strength of team, because he didn't play at the FBS level. But I kind of treated him as if he was like a Division III or Division II player to see how he tested or how he produced for the Argonauts. And based on his data here, he had a very good pass deflection score with above average solo tackles and interceptions, but he mostly was a pass deflection type of player. Then, of course, when you get to athleticism traits, this is a big thing that I really like about Stiggers is he does have really good athleticism. And a class that doesn't have a lot of great athletes at the cornerback position. And he had an 87 percentile explosion score, 90 percentile in terms of speed, and 72 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size. All those areas I think are pretty decent for him, athletically speaking, to where he could become a very good cornerback at the next level. And he might even become a Pro Bowl All-Pro cornerback based on his overall data. So I really like that aspect about him as well. And then based on his adjusted production traits, his pass score is not that great because of his level of competition, but he does have a very good age score. So unlike a lot of CFL prospects that come out in the draft, Stiggers did do well in terms of just his ability to be a younger prospect with good athleticism and good production traits for where he played at the Toronto Argonauts. So I'm excited about him. I think he has NFL athleticism, a good size, and everything else like that, and he might end up surprising a lot of folks. I really think this might be the best pick that the Jets had in this draft, because based on his overall data. Then, of course, we get to the last pick of the draft for the Jets in Jalen Key, safety out of Alabama. His data grade is 58.81, projected floor is 41.79, with a balanced grade of 57.50 out of 100. His average AV is 1.16 out of 100, with an overall pick grade of a F. So Jalen Key, based on his production traits, he had really good interception data, but his pass deflection data was really low, and his solo tackle data was only slightly above average. So those are the major concerns with him. And then, of course, when you get to athleticism traits, he had above average explosiveness with below average speed and above average flexibility for his size. So he did have a really good explosion score, but when you look at the starter averages at the position, he is below average in terms of his speed and flexibility for his size. And then the last part is his adjusted production score. So his age is very low. He's a very much so older prospect, but his pass score is at least above average. So I don't like to pick 100% where he was selected. A lot of those players usually end up becoming nothing at the next level. I think the closest starter to where he was based on his overall data was Marlon McCree, who's a really old school type safety type. He might be that because the Jets need safety help. So don't be surprised if Jalen Key becomes a starter. Not to say that he would be a high quality starter, but don't be surprised if he does just because of the depth at the safety position for the Jets. So he might end up surprising folks just because they need help at that position, but we'll see. So overall, my final grade for the Jets would be a C. Did they meet all their roster needs? Yes. Did they draft good prospects? Yes. Did they draft prospects that had the data potential to outperform their draft status? Yes. The Jets had the 14th best draft class this year based on the talent and value of their selections based on my grading method. But the selections of two running backs in day three was perplexing with the other needs on the roster. So the reason why I gave them a C is they did start out really well in terms of the prospects they selected, but then they just started taking prospects that don't really meet all their needs. And especially the fact that you double down on running backs when you already have a running back in Brees Hall and you already have another running back in Izzy. I mean, unless you're trying to get rid of Izzy, but even then, why would you do that? You know, those are my issues with the Jets draft. Is I do think they took some good players, but overall, I think there are some concerns in terms of the overall data. But overall, thanks so much for watching. Check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, check out my ex formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.